Hello. Welcome to Intermediate WordPress, Gutenberg for content creators. My name is Brian DeConick, and I work with OIT Design and Web Services, the WordPress group in OIT. Uh, Welcome to a YouTube Live workshop. Couple of quick comments about YouTube Live. We've used this for a handful of training workshops before, and it works pretty well, but there are a few, I guess I'd say quirks. First is that I can't see your reactions, so I'm going to try to keep an eye on the Q&A document if I'm going too fast or if something's not clear. Um, the Q&A document is linked to in the video description. It's a Google Doc that's available to everybody, so if you could go ahead and open that up and just say hi and let me know that you can hear what I'm saying, because that would be sad if I was talking and the volume wasn't working. Um, so YouTube Live every now and then decides to throw us for a little bit of a loop. One time when we were doing this, I got logged out of my Google account in the middle of it. So if anything goes wrong, I just ask for you to bear with us, and we'll try to figure things out as we go. Excuse me. My colleague Miles Elliott is hanging out in the Q&A document, and he may answer some questions if I don't see them, or if it's easier for him to quickly answer rather than stop the presentation. And he'll let me know if there's anything that I need to go over again out loud. And I guess I'll just also caution you, there's a little bit of a delay between when I say something, when it gets broadcast through YouTube, and then when you type your question and when we see your question. So if you ask a question and nobody responds for a minute or two, we're not ignoring you. It's just that we haven't seen it yet. So with all of that said, welcome. I guess one other disclaimer up front. I am broadcasting this from home today, which means there's a slight chance that one of my cats might decide that they want to say hi. So if you hear any scuffling or cat-like noises in the background, that's what that is. So now, with all of that out of the way, welcome to Gutenberg for Content Creators. My name is Brian DeConick. I work with OIT Design and Web Services, like I said, and let's talk about what's coming up in WordPress, coming to a WordPress site near you very soon. So today we're going to talk about first the what, why, and when of Gutenberg, sort of give you a sense of why these changes are happening and what that means for us. We're going to take a look at the new editor. I'm going to show you some of the things that you're going to want to look out for, some of the things that trip people up. We'll talk a little bit about what happens when your site gets upgraded to Gutenberg. And then I'll share some links to resources that you can go back to whenever you need to. I'll also be sending out an email at the end of the workshop to the with a link to these slides and just some other information about our group, and if you need to contact us if you have any questions. And then finally, we're going to have some time to have some hands-on experience with the new Gutenberg editor, so you can all get a chance to get it under your fingers. So what's the big deal? What, why, and when of Gutenberg? Hopefully, if you're in this workshop, you've used WordPress for a campus website or even something else, and there's a really good chance that you know this interface really well. This is the classic visual editor. For a long time, it's just been referred to as the visual editor, but with all the Gutenberg changes, now it's the classic editor. And this has been the default content editor in WordPress for about 12 years. And with the way things change on the internet with new technologies, 12 years is a really long time. 12 years is longer than I've been a web developer. So in terms of how long I've been working with WordPress, this is all I've known, and it's probably all that a lot of people who create content on Canvas have known as well. And the WordPress Classic Editor is great. It is a great tool, except sometimes when it's not. And that's really the crux of this. In the classic editor, it's really easy to build a simple page that's mostly text and some images. It's really dependable and reliable. It's the same sort of interface that you can write an email in Gmail or something like that, and you get this WYSIWYG experience. What you see is what you get. Um, that's when you're building simple pages. When you're building a more complex page, things get more complicated quickly. It doesn't really give you a lot of tools to work with to build those complex layouts. And instead of WYSIWYG, you end up with this. What you see is not necessarily what you get, depending on several different factors. And we'll talk a little bit about what I mean by that in just a moment. So just to sort of visually show you what I mean, here we have a sample NC State website. As far as I know, there's not actually a Department of Baked Goods, at least not yet. I assume you're laughing at my jokes. I don't have any audience feedback, so if you think I'm not funny, please tell me in the Q&A document. Anyway, so on the left-hand side, we have the classic editor. Somebody has created content, added an image, done some basic rich text formatting. And then on the right-hand side, we have the published page. And it looks pretty similar. You have this WYSIWYG experience. But this is a simple page. On the right-hand side of this slide, we have a more complex page here. We got one of these banners across the top with a little icon. We got a 2-column layout near the bottom. We got another little icon and a font change and this little arrow. You see these all over on campus websites. If you hover over one of the big links, the little arrow scoots to the right. So that's sort of reasonable things to expect out of a website in 2018. But you go over to the visual editor on the left-hand side, and it's not really clear how you do that. There's not a button that says, add a little arrow that scoots to the right when I hover over it. And so this is where WordPress is sort of holding us back. We have these tools that are very good at what they're designed to do, but they don't go very much beyond that. And so over the last 12 years, we've been collectively, as the worldwide WordPress community, we've been coming up with ways to get WordPress to do more. So here's the sort of cascade of screenshots. In the top left, we have shortcodes, these little brackety things where you have to know the attributes and the values that those attributes can take. In the middle, there's something called shortcake, which makes shortcodes but gives them a nicer user interface, but still works the same way. You end up with the little brackety things in the backend code. Over on the right-hand side, we have a screenshot from advanced custom fields, which you may have seen on some campus websites, where built into your WordPress theme are all of these special designated fields that map to different parts of your page. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, we have a screenshot from a page building plugin that gives you a wholly different interface and gives you more things that you can do, but it's a wholly different interface. And all of these tools can be pretty powerful, can be used to do a lot of stuff, but they're also kind of unintuitive. None of them are just regular WordPress. None of them you can just pick up and use. You have to sort of figure it out. You have to experiment a lot, and you can't really use them in combination with each other. So if one thing is built for shortcodes, and then you're also trying to use a page building plugin, maybe there's a way you can get it all to play nicely, but a lot of the time they're going to break each other. So while the WordPress community has been building those kinds of things, the rest of the web has been moving on. We have these 3 screenshots here for different web publishing tools, Medium, Wix, and Squarespace. You may have used these for personal projects or something like that off campus. And they are really nice user experiences. They've got this clean interface that's very icon driven. With the Wix screenshot here, we have a little menu of options that's only pops up when text is highlighted, and it disappears when you can't use those things. So it's a much more sophisticated and much cleaner and easier user interface than all of these other things that we've been creating for the last 12 years. And we're not going to switch to any of those things. As far as we're concerned, WordPress is a much better tool for campus because there's a lot of flexibility built in. It's enterprise ready, so we can deploy it in lots of different ways and scale it up to the size of our needs as a university. Um, and also, it would be a lot of work just to make that switch, and nobody wants to do that. But that doesn't mean that those newcomers, those things like Squarespace and Medium and Wix can't give you a little bit of guidance, a fresh look at what content creation can look like. And especially the the control that you get as a content creator over the look and feel of your website, and then the modern and clean user interface, um, are things that may be worth exploring, worth emulating from those newcomers. So it's not just me saying this. The WordPress community as a whole started to realize that it's time to move on and build something new. So this is at the beginning of January. Matt Mullenweg, who is the person who wrote the first version of WordPress and is still the sort of the lead developer for the WordPress project of the thousands of people that contribute, he published a blog post setting out the goals for the next couple of years. And one of those goals would be to create a new page and post building experience that makes writing rich posts effortless and has blocks to make it easy to do the things that all those other things were doing before. And you'll hear me use the word block a lot. Um, the new editor, which we're going to talk about in a moment, is all about blocks. So that new editor is where we are now. The new editor is called Gutenberg. So WordPress will remain WordPress, but Gutenberg is sort of the code name for the new editor so that people know what they're talking about, the difference between old classic editor and new Gutenberg editor. Um, it will be the default WordPress editor starting in version 5.0. Right now we are in version 4.9.5, so we're getting very close to that 5.0, and version 5.0 will be released sometime soon. We don't know exactly when it's going to be released. It's not going to be released until Gutenberg is considered ready. And early on, there were some indications that they were hoping to have it out in April. Since we're over halfway through April and they have not indicated that it's coming soon, and we've been following the chatter in the WordPress community very closely. Um, it's probably not going to happen in April. But there's definitely been a lot of work done recently to try to bring Gutenberg up to a point where it will be ready. And so I think sometime in the next couple of months, you're going to start seeing that WordPress 5.0 update option if you're a site administrator. And then we'd have to start talking more seriously about using Gutenberg. So you're all here now. It's April. Gutenberg isn't officially released yet, which means you're all off to a head start. You all have an early look at what's coming and a chance to sort of acclimate yourself. So congratulations on your forethought. So one disclaimer before we start looking at the Gutenberg tool itself. It is an evolving tool. So like I said, a lot of work has been done in recent weeks to really bring it up to a better level, and there's still ongoing work. Another version is actually probably going to be released today or tomorrow. So some of the things that you see today may not be exactly what you see when your site is upgraded to the new editor. It should be pretty close. This should give you a pretty good sense for what's coming, and should hopefully still be a very useful workshop for you. The other disclaimer I'll add is since WordPress is so extensible, since WordPress can be customized in so many different ways, and this is one of the reasons we like it on campus, um, there are some things for your specific site that might look different from what we demo here today, or just sort of anybody else on campus's WordPress website as well. So we're always open to questions. If you see something at some point and you think this doesn't seem normal on your site or whatever, you can always contact our group through the help desk, help@ncc.edu, and I'll talk about a couple of other ways you can get help at the end of the presentation as well. So let's meet the new editor. The good news is that most of WordPress isn't changing. So all these things down the left-hand sidebar, the media, the comments, and then if you have the administrative access to change the theme or plugins or manage users, none of that stuff is changing. What is changing are posts and pages. And even the management of those is not changing, where you have the full list of all of your pages. Um, what will be changing will be how you edit them, how you change the content or create new ones. If your website has additional content types like people or publications or things like that, you'll also see changes there. And then there are themes and plugins that change the content editing experience that may need to be adjusted as well. And that's something that we'll touch on in a little bit as well. So this is what Gutenberg looks like out of the box. Um, You've got your page title. This is Gutenberg. You've got I wrote my first paragraph of text here, which is, again, we see some echoes of those tools like Wix and Squarespace, and Medium is a much cleaner interface. You've got many more icons rather than text. And then I do have this little arrow here pointing at the plus button. I'm pointing at the plus button for a couple of reasons. First, that we're going to use it quite a lot to add new blocks. I mentioned blocks earlier. And second, the plus button that I'm pointing at right there isn't actually part of Gutenberg anymore. In an earlier version, it got removed and the plus button was moved slightly. So what you see right there isn't actually something you'll see when you start experimenting with Gutenberg. And we left that there in the slide, partly because we're lazy and don't want to change our slides, and partly because it sort of underscores the fact that this is a changing tool, and you never know what they might try to do to improve things. We do have a running list of things that keep changing just so that we can keep track of them. So in Gutenberg, everything is a block. And that's the big conceptual leap. Rather than just typing in a text editor and putting in images and publishing, now when you're typing in your text editor, every paragraph you make, every ordered list or unordered list with bullet points, every heading, um, WordPress will interpret that as blocks. So it will you don't have to do anything special necessarily. You can just type as you normally would, and every time you hit enter, you still get a new paragraph. Um, but when you get that new paragraph, WordPress processes it as a separate block. Uh, we'll talk a little bit about what that means. Anything that you add to a post or a page is a block. So it's not just paragraphs, it's not just headings, it's anything that you might try to add to your page. So that might be images, that might be videos, that might YouTube videos or any other kind of video embed. It would be buttons. It would be if you add a data table or something like that. All of these exist as separate separate blocks in the editor. The plus button gives you the option of adding a new block to your poster page. By default, if you just hit enter, you're going to end up with a paragraph block because most of the time you're just going to be writing text. But if you push that plus button, you get options for all the different types of blocks that you might want to use. The plus button appears in multiple places. Sometimes it'll appear or disappear depending on what you're doing, because Gutenberg is really trying to go in on this clean, intuitive user interface. But the plus button in the top left-hand corner will always be there and will always be a place where you can go and say, I want to add an image, or I want to add, an audio clip or something like that. When you hover over a block with your mouse, or when you tab into it with your keyboard, you'll see this little gray box around the edge of it. And off to the right-hand side, you have these three dots, one, two, three, on top of each other, that are a button that you can push to open up a menu of items. These are different things that you can do to customize and transform each individual block. Um, so here we have a bunch of different things you can do to a paragraph block. You can turn a paragraph block into a heading or a list. You can remove it. You can edit the raw HTML if you need to adjust some sort of styling like that, if you're comfortable working in HTML. And there are other things you can do too that we're going to see in a little bit. All blocks have options in their block menu, but they also have options over in the advanced settings sidebar. And this is another big conceptual leap. So I'll go back one slide. The top option in the drop-down menu right here says Show Advanced Settings. And if you click Show Advanced Settings, that will open up the right-hand sidebar. And then also, once the right-hand sidebar is open, now you have Hide Advanced Settings if you want to close that sidebar. That right-hand sidebar is sort of a new thing in WordPress. We're used to seeing in the right-hand side um, things relating to the entire poster page. If you're changing, like if you're going to publish it or you want to change the date that it's being published, if you are adding categories or tags, things like that, that's what we normally look for on the right-hand side. We don't normally look for things that are customizing the content itself. So this is a little bit of a change, and in our user testing, this is something that tripped a lot of people up. Every block, or just about every block, has at least one advanced setting. Sometimes that advanced setting isn't anything very impressive. Sometimes you have lots of different options. So here we have a paragraph block. We're looking at its advanced settings on the right-hand side, and you have the option of adding a drop cap. You have the option of changing the font size. You have the option of changing the background color and the text color, and so on and so forth. So what options appear in these two different areas, the menu and in the sidebar, all depends on what block you're working with. And this is another thing that has tripped people up is getting used to the idea that the options that are available aren't always the same for every block. But it makes sense. It doesn't make sense to change the text color when you're working with an image block because an image is just an image. It doesn't have text. Um, so here we have an image block right here. We have a handful of options, including removing and duplicating and converting to a reusable block or turning into a gallery. But then when you go to the advanced settings in the right-hand sidebar, you don't have very many options. You have the option to add a CSS class, which unless you're working with specific CSS classes in your theme, you're almost always going to ignore. Here we have another block, which is the read more block. This is a function that's already in WordPress. When you're working with a blog post, you can hide everything after the read more line so that you have to click on a little read more link in order to see it. The read more block, there's not a lot you can do with it in terms of block options because well, just because it doesn't really do a whole lot. So here we see that it has a much smaller drop-down menu and a different option in the advanced block settings. As you're looking at new blocks, you'll see that they're organized into 4 tabs. Recent, so recent will be your recent blocks, things that you've used recently, and if it's your first time using Gutenberg, just sort of common things. You've got blocks, which is everything except for embeds. And so the embeds tab would be things that you add to the page, like YouTube videos or things like that, that are coming from an external source, and then saved. And we'll see saved in just a moment. Oh, and here I forgot about this slide. So this slide is saying what I just said. Embeds are things from an external source that you might be embedding, like a YouTube video or a Twitter post. These are things that are already supported in WordPress, where if you copy the YouTube URL and paste it into the editor, it will be auto-processed into an embed. And that's still the case. If you take your YouTube URL and paste it into a paragraph block, the same sort of auto embed process will happen. But you can also use the embed block, and when you do that, it will be turned into an embed block when you do that paste and auto format sort of thing. So the Saved tab is empty by default. The first time you go to it, there won't be anything in it. But you can add things to it using the Convert to Reusable Block option. And this is something that's new and I think pretty exciting in WordPress. The idea is if you have some sort of content that you know you're going to be adding over and over and over again on multiple pages, then you can take that block and convert it into a reusable block and give it a name like, post footer or something like that, that you know you're going to be adding it to the end of every blog post. And then you won't have to recreate that paragraph of text or that button or something like that. You'll just have to go to the reusable blocks or go to the saved tab in your block menu and select the one that you want to insert. So this is what that will look like. A reusable block is here and saved with the name that you gave it. For instance, left text profile. Um, it'll give you a preview of what that block looks like. And then if you click on it, it will insert it into your poster page. So as I said earlier, the blocks tab is where just about everything is, and it itself is subdivided into 4 sections: the common blocks, formatting blocks, layout blocks, and widgets. Widgets are things that are more familiar from your sidebar widgets if you've ever added anything to a sidebar. Layout blocks are going to be things like columns. Um, Formatting blocks are going to be options for uh, I guess, formatting text or displaying things in different ways. And then common blocks are these things like paragraph and heading and image, these things that you might use over and over again. So we have this question in the Q&A document. If my coworker and I both edit the same website, then can we see each other's saved blocks? That's yes, it is. You can uh, at least right now when we've been working with it, a saved block is available to all of the people who have the same permission level for creating and editing content in WordPress. Um, so hopefully we'll get a chance to see that in a little bit, although I'm not sure how our demo is going to work, so I may be saying something. Okay. If you have any questions about how that works, certainly come by and talk to us at our office hours on Fridays, which I'll talk about at the very end of the presentation, because I don't know if I'm going to be able to demo multiple users being able to see the same um, saved blocks. But yes, that's a great question. It is definitely possible to share saved blocks between different users. Feel like I answered that in the most roundabout and unclear sort of way. So I hope that all of that makes sense. So here are some everyday blocks that you're going to use all the time. Um, your heading block, your paragraph block, your list block, and your image block. These all do things that you are hopefully very familiar with using the regular classic WordPress editor. I don't think I have to explain what each of these does, hopefully. And if you're a little confused about maybe like list is it bullet points and numbered lists or things like that, we'll start to see that as we do some examples in a little bit. So some other blocks worth mentioning that you might be very interested in. There's the classic block, which is the basically the old classic WordPress editor uh, in block form. So anything that you're not sure how to do in Gutenberg, if you add a classic block, you can do it, and you are familiar with how to do it in the old classic editor, you'll be able to do it in that classic block. The shortcode block, if you have any shortcodes, excuse me. If you have any shortcodes in your poster page, uh, they'll get converted into a shortcode block. So all of that old functionality that has existed and these sort of workarounds that have existed in WordPress before, um, with shortcodes, that'll get preserved in the form of a block here. Um, You have the button block, which is what it sounds like. It's a button that you click and it takes you somewhere. It's a way of drawing more attention than a link would. Um, you have a cover image block, which is kind of cool text over the image effect, and we'll see that in a little bit. Latest posts will dynamically populate a list of whatever your latest blog posts are. Columns are multi-column layout. It has the experimental label on it, and that's it's still definitely a work in progress. They're hopefully going to be improving it over the next couple of weeks. Um, excuse me, but uh, once you get the hang of it, it's a really powerful tool. Um, and then the gallery block is, I think, a very nice addition. So WordPress has had built into it for a long time the option of adding photo galleries or image galleries, but they've always been a little clunky. This gallery block is a much cleaner and nicer implementation of that. We also have some blocks that are maybe worth forgetting. They're available, but they aren't really worth using in very many situations. So there's the quote block and the pull quote block, and they do slightly different things, but the difference between them is very subtle. So I would suggest trying to use both the quote and the pull quote just on your own for practice to see which one does which and which one does the other. But it's definitely a point of confusion, and try to get yourself into the habit of, if you like the way the pull quote block looks over the quote block, just try to get yourself into the habit of always using that pull quote block. It's especially frustrating that they have the same little icon in their button. um, the subhead block is different than the heading block, uh, and it isn't actually coded to use any sort of heading tags like an H1 or an H2 or an H3 in HTML. It's just a visual effect. Um, Subheadings are not that it's not bad to use them necessarily, but you need to make sure that they don't substitute the regular uh, heading. Excuse me, they don't substitute the regular heading structure of your website. Um, the video block is something that we're going to discourage people on campus from using, um, because uh, so the video block is looking for a video file in your media library, and most campus web hosting isn't really designed to accommodate uploading an MP4 or other video files into WordPress. Generally, we recommend that you embed using YouTube or Vimeo or something like that. And the video block is a different block than the YouTube embed block. We're actually looking at ways of maybe blocking out this video block in some of the sites that we manage so that it doesn't lead to that kind of confusion. The code block is a way for displaying code if you want to share code. Um, that's probably not going to be used in most cases on campus. And then the verse block uh, is also not going to be used in most cases on campus. It's imagined as a way for writing poetry. So in WordPress at large, there are poetry blogs, and the verse block will respect white space and line breaks and things like that. So um, if the way your poem is being displayed, it's important that you have 3 blank lines between your 2 lines of text. Uh, you have that option in your verse block. At NC State, that's probably not going to come up very often, but you never know. So all of this is a very different user experience, and I've touched on some of the trouble points as we've gone along, but I want to highlight a few things specifically right now. Um, yeah, so it's very different from what most of us are used to. It gives us lots of new tools, but it is a big change that we're going to have to get used to. So in January, our team conducted some campus user testing. We picked out some WordPress power users who we knew already very well because we've worked with their websites. We knew they would be able to give us some good feedback. And most of them were very familiar with how WordPress already worked. And we gave them a 30-minute exercise to learn the new editor and create content using it. I wrote a really long, probably longer than it needed to be, blog post at that URL, where you can read all about how things went. Don't read about it right now because I'm going to talk to you about some of the top, takeaways from that. But that's available if you're curious to know how that went. And we got a lot of really good user testing feedback, and actually some stuff that we were able to pass back to the core WordPress and Gutenberg team that's led to some improvements in the editor. So some of the things that we've seen. First is that when people are starting out with the new editor, no one knows what to call anything or where anything is. And that's sort of to be expected because everything looks different, and with more and more icons instead of text on the page, it's not really clear what to call things. So we have this little three dot button that opens up the drop down menu on a block. And one of our user testers struggled to come up with a word for it, and he called it the little mini hamburger options thing. And that's, if you're familiar with a hamburger menu, that works. You can sort of figure that out. But if somebody on the street just walks up to you and says, "Hey, what's a little mini hamburger options thing?" You're probably not going to be able to figure out what they're talking about. And similarly, if somebody walks up to you on the street and shows you three dots and a vertical line and says, "What would you call this?" You're probably going to struggle to come up with a name for it too. So starting out, nobody knows what anything's called, and everybody's sort of trying to figure it out as we go. Uh, don't let that discourage you. Um, and maybe if you're training or showing Gutenberg to other people in your office, um, sort of be aware that it's hard to talk about until you really get the hang of how it works. So another issue that we ran into is that it's not always clear when to choose which block. And so I mentioned the video block and the YouTube block. They do different things. The video block is looking for a video file in your media library, and the YouTube block is looking for a YouTube link to embed. And so they do different things, and putting the URL for one thing into the space for another block, uh, it's not going to work. You're going to end up with nothing rendering or just an empty video player rendering. So one thing that people will need to start to learn, and that we're going to try to help people learn, is the difference between blocks and when to choose one and when to choose the other. um, I mentioned this earlier, but the advanced block settings over on the right-hand column, nobody that we tested noticed that the first time without getting a hint from us. It was like it didn't even exist. It didn't even register that that was something that was available to them. And also in general, people struggled with this idea that sometimes options are available and sometimes they're not, depending on what you're doing. Um, and this is a big departure in WordPress and a big change. Once you get the hang of it, and most of the people we tested, 30 minutes in, they were rocking and rolling. They were building content with no trouble. Um, once you get the hang of it, it's not so bad. But it's getting to the point where it's not so bad that's a little bumpy. Sometimes it's not clear when you need a new type of block and when you can just customize the block that you have. And so here we have a paragraph block at the top and a paragraph block at the bottom. The difference is that I used some of those advanced block options to change the color, change the font size, add the drop cap at the beginning, change the background color. It's the exact same block, just with a couple of customizations. So sometimes you'll need to find a new block. Sometimes you can just tweak the thing that you already have. And then we noticed this too. Sometimes people were confused about whether they could select text and format it, or uh, uh, whether they needed to select text before they formatted it, or whether the advanced block options would apply to the entire block. And so the answer there is, if you select text, the top toolbar where you have your bold and italics and things like that, um, that's a place where when you're bolding text, it'll only apply to the selected text. But anything in the advanced block settings over on the right-hand sidebar, like changing font size or things like that, that will apply to the entire block. So for a paragraph, that will apply for the entire paragraph. And that's something that you just sort of have to get used to, get the hang of. And then the two big things, um, the two big things that people will need to learn and remember as they adjust to Gutenberg. Number one, you really got to look over at that advanced settings on the right for more options. There's a lot that you can do there. Don't forget about it. And number two, try a different block. If the block that you're working with isn't doing what you think it's doing, go ahead and look for another one and give it a shot. It looks like a question that Miles is answering. Um, about whether customizations and changes that we make in Gutenberg will all fit within the NC State brand guidelines. And so things like fonts and font size and colors and things like that. So Miles is answering here too, but I'll go ahead and speak also. Um, we're going to be using the same Gutenberg that the rest of the world is using, but there are things that we can do to encourage good behavior or put limits using themes or plugins on campus. Um, so one of the things we're working with other developers on campus to do is to try to make sure that we have some custom blocks that will match campus brand standards, and in some cases we may remove or hide existing blocks and replace them with our own custom blocks. Um, but ultimately, it's still on you to make good choices and be aware of the brand and things like that, just like it has been in regular WordPress. We're going to do everything we can to make that easier, but if and actually there's some warnings built in. So if you have your hot pink text against a against a yellow background, that's a bad idea for lots of different reasons. And Gutenberg can warn you and tell you you shouldn't do that. That's a bad color combination. But if you are dead set determined on pink on yellow, um, that's what you're going to publish and that's what you're going to display, just like is the case now in WordPress. So, talking about what you have the power to do now versus what you'll have the power to do in Gutenberg sort of leads to this next question, which is what happens when you get upgraded? Um, and so that gets a little complicated, but I'm going to try to talk you through it. Right now, Gutenberg is available as a Gutenberg plugin, so you can turn it on any existing website to test it out. And it works pretty well. We've turned it on for a handful of websites that we manage to give people an early look and to give them a chance to get used to it. And with that plugin, you have the option of either choosing to use Gutenberg or choosing to use the classic editor. So in the screenshot here, we have a page. When you hover your mouse over the page title, you have the little row underneath it of your edit links. And you have an edit link, the first one that will edit it in Gutenberg, and then the second one that will edit it using the classic editor. And you can go back and forth between those two. That being said, if you create stuff in the page, if you create blocks in the page using all of the new fancy blocks that Gutenberg offers, editing it in the classic editor may not work as well as you expect. So that's now while the Gutenberg plugin is in use before WordPress 5.0 is released. After WordPress 5.0, there's another plugin that can sort of roll you back to the classic editor, and we'll talk about why you might want to do that. But otherwise, Gutenberg will be the default editor. You won't have that classic editor link right there. So in terms of how you edit a page after WordPress 5.0, you'll go in and you'll click that edit link, same as always. Before WordPress 5.0, using the Gutenberg plugin, you have a couple more options to switch between editors. When you get upgraded to version 5.0 and start using Gutenberg, um, all the content that you've created prior to this in your website will remain. It's not all going to be deleted. It's not all going to break. For somebody who's showing up on on the front end of your website and viewing things, they will not see any difference whatsoever. When you log in and you go to edit that content, what you'll see is uh, your old content, or rather your existing content, will have been dumped into a classic editor block. And so that is the block that's sort of a recreation of the old editor in Gutenberg. You can continue to edit your content in the block in this classic editor block, and in that block you'll have just the regular tools that are available to you now in WordPress. Um, and so there may be some posts or pages that you never do anything to beyond just leave it in that classic editor block. If you want to do something more interesting, if you want to add a button or add some other kind of block that's available in Gutenberg, there's a process you'll have to follow, a very simple process to uh, convert the existing classic editor block into new Gutenberg blocks. So what you'll see is in that right-hand three-dot menu, you'll see an option just on the classic block, uh, classic editor block. You'll see an option to convert to blocks. And when you click that, Gutenberg will take all of the content in your existing classic block and break it up into blocks that it recognizes. So paragraphs in your classic block will become paragraph blocks. And you'll see what it looks like. So on the left-hand side, we have a page that's all of the content in one classic block. And then on the right-hand side, we have the same page after it's been broken into new blocks. So the top paragraph there is now a distinct block from the rest of the text, and you'll see in the left-hand side there was some custom code that was added, an iframe. In the right-hand side, Gutenberg has taken that iframe and converted it into an HTML block. And that's Gutenberg saying, I don't have a block for this, so I'll just take the code here and put it into sort of a placeholder block, and assume that you can edit the code if you need to. So a question that Miles is answering. So it is okay. The question is, do you have to go through and update the classic blocks, or is it all right to leave them? Is it just fine to leave them? You'll only want to update them when you're adding new content and doing something that will require the full Gutenberg editor. And Miles is giving a much better answer than I am. So if Gutenberg doesn't recognize the code that it sees in your poster or page, what it will do is it will detect an error and offer some possible fixes. This looks kind of scary. The first time I saw it, I was scared that I had broken something, but it's not too bad. The overwrite option is Gutenberg will try to do its best to match the code that it sees to be the blocks that it knows about. And if it does that, you may lose a little bit of formatting or something like that, but generally speaking, everything should go okay. Convert to Classic will just take whatever it doesn't recognize and put it back into the Classic Editor block, thinking, it used to work in Classic Editor, it'll probably continue to work in Classic Editor, we're just not going to touch it. And then the Edit as HTML button will save it as a custom HTML block, and you'll have the option of directly editing that code if you need to make some sort of a change. Generally speaking, we don't see this error message very often. It's really only happening if something sort of quirky is going on in that poster or page. So how it looks beyond that, you have sort of 4 different scenarios that I'm going to talk through for what might happen. If you have a vanilla WordPress website where it's a pretty simple website, you don't have a lot of things going on in it, not a lot of bells and whistles, just regular content. If you have a website that uses shortcodes or shortcake powered shortcodes, which is something that OIT has done a lot of and websites we've built for campus. If you have sites that use advanced custom fields, A lot of outside vendors and also university communications and sometimes OIT. We built websites using advanced custom fields. And then if you have a website that uses a page building plugin, so something like Visual Composer or Divi or Beaver Builder, if any of those sound familiar to you. So with vanilla WordPress, it should be a smooth upgrade. Not a lot will go wrong. You may have old plugins that break, but anything that hasn't been updated in 2 or 3 or 4 years probably needed to be looked at anyway. Um, Generally speaking, everything should go pretty smoothly. All you'll have to do is do that process that we talked through a moment ago of converting classic blocks into breaking that up into regular Gutenberg blocks. If you use shortcodes or shortcake powered shortcodes, you might see something like this in the existing classic editor. This is, and as I said earlier, this is a lot of people that our group has built websites for, and a couple of other people on campus use this as well. Um, so if you see something like this in your page, you'll see basically the same process. Um, so the content will get dumped into a classic block, and the shortcode previews that you're used to might look a little different, but they'll basically work. Then if you convert it into blocks in order to use all of the new block tools, you'll lose your shortcode preview, but everything will still basically continue to work. We're in the process right now of developing some custom blocks. I mentioned and Miles mentioned in the Q&A document that we're building custom blocks that match campus branding. These custom blocks are going to replace a lot of these shortcodes that you may have used before, um, and will display a nice preview in the editor instead of this wall of shortcode text like you see here. So once you switch, if you use shortcodes, there's no reason why you can't just leave the shortcode in a shortcode block like this. There's no immediate need to switch to a different block or something like that. Just that it's not going to be as pretty while you're editing it, but it'll still render the way you expect it to render on the public-facing website. If you use a website, or if you're using a website that was built using advanced custom fields, you might see something that sort of looks like this, where you have uh, separate modules and you have the option of adding rows of modules of different types. This is a really powerful tool that a lot of folks on campus, including our group, but also university communications and others, have used on a lot of different websites. And unfortunately, it's a very powerful tool, but there's a little more work that's going to go into making it play nice with Gutenberg. The good news is all of those tools that you used, all of those modules, all those sort of ACF fields that you used before, they're all still going to work. They're all still going to render just fine. You're not really going to have to do anything different. The downside is the way ACF powered pages are built. A lot of the time, um, the only content that renders on the front end of your website will be things coming from those modules. And so here on the right hand side, we see a screenshot of an ACF powered page converted into Gutenberg. It looks a little bit different, but it all still basically functions. Beneath the regular content editor in Gutenberg, you have those modules that you can continue to add. The downside is that all these blocks that we've been showing off, all the stuff I've been talking about with the Gutenberg editor, you can add them, but they won't really display on the front end of your website. They won't really do anything. And so you have a user interface where the top half is basically useless and you'll only be able to use the bottom half. Now, I know that the folks in UCOM are working on some solutions to this, and that we're talking with them pretty regularly. And Miles, who's answering questions in the Q&A document, has a basically working process for converting from ACF to blocks with an auto conversion script, which is really cool. But it's something that's going to require a little bit of testing and a little bit of cleanup and a little bit of developer time, if this is the kind of website that you have. If you're using these sort of modules, ACF modules in your page, and if you're not exactly sure what you're using, I will talk about that in a moment too. So as I said, the front end won't break, but the editor will be a little bit more confusing because you have this whole section that doesn't really do anything. And so because of that, some themes may need some significant rewrites. And really, your experience will depend on how ACF is integrated into your environment and what your developer's solution is for your website. Then we have page building plugins. So the truth about page building plugins is we're not really sure what's going to happen if your website uses a page building plugin. And the reason for that is because there are so many page building plugins out there and available. It's not really practical to test all of them or to have some sense for uh, uh, what's going to be normal, because there isn't really a normal. So here we have Samuel L. Jackson saying, "Hold on to your butts," and that's sort of where we're at with this. Is some of the sites that we maintain that do use page building plugins. At some point, we're going to flip the switch and turn on Gutenberg and see what happens. Hopefully, we're going to do that in a copy of the website in a testing environment and not on the live website. But we just have to sort of see what happens and try to make adjustments that we need to make. But it's not all just a blind dive into the world of Gutenberg. If you're using something like Divi or Visual Composer or Beaver Builder or any of these other tools, the best thing you can do is contact the vendor who created that tool, or at least go to their website and and look to see if they've published anything about Gutenberg and find out what their plan for Gutenberg compatibility is. If they have a plan, then you're going to want to make sure you have an up-to-date license. So a lot of these tools aren't free. You've paid for them at some point. If you're not currently paying for them, you'll probably want to get an up-to-date license and continue and start paying for it again, because you'll want to make sure you're at the latest version of their plugin when Gutenberg arrives. If they don't have a plan, then now's the time to start looking at other options. Not upgrading to WordPress 5.0 isn't a solution, because there are important security updates that get added with each version of WordPress. Um, WordPress 5.0 is like that initial release is probably not going to include any security updates, because they don't want to bundle too much into one release, and that should give us a little bit of time to sort of make some minor adjustments and delay for a little bit. But long term, you want to make sure that you are either going to use Gutenberg or going to be using a tool that plays nicely with Gutenberg. So now I'm going to give you your homework. Uh, so your homework is to determine whether your site uses shortcodes, advanced custom fields, or a page building plugin. And I'll share these slides out again, and you can sort of match against some of the screenshots and decide what looks familiar. And if you use any of those things, contact the support team you need to contact, whether that's uh, an outside vendor or a team on campus that you work with. If you are not sure, if you need some advice or need some help figuring out what each thing might look like in your website, our group, OIT Design and Web Services, holds open WordPress office hours every Friday morning from 9 to noon, usually in the Avant Ferry Technology Complex building, room 106, although sometimes they kick us out and put us in other places. So feel free to stop by on a Friday morning and get some general advice from us on that. I will say that the not this coming Friday, but the next Friday, we're going to be gone because we're going to a staff retreat. But generally speaking, most Fridays, you'll find us and be able to ask us, hopefully, any question that you could possibly have about WordPress. I might be raising the stakes a little bit. We don't always have all the answers, but we can at least point you in the right direction. So, besides our office hours, there are a number of resources that are available out on the web. Um, there's official information from WordPress, and you can check out the Gutenberg plugin. Um, we've been compiling our own information, OIT Design Guten Help, and then our website has more information as well. And then in a couple of weekends, April 28th and 29th is WordCamp Raleigh, which is not just a higher ed thing, not just an NC State thing. It's sort of anybody who uses WordPress in the Raleigh-Durham area. There are talks and presentations about um, different things relating to WordPress. And actually, some folks from our team are going to be presenting at that conference. It's not free. It's like a $35 per person sort of event. But if you're, and it's a Saturday, Sunday. So if you're a WordPress overachiever, it's a good opportunity to learn a little bit more and see a little bit more. You don't have to scramble to write these down. I'm going to share these links out with the slides after we're done here today. And then, of course, office hours I mentioned a moment ago. So I've been talking a lot, and I'm a little exhausted. So now it's time for you to do something. Now it's time for you to try out Gutenberg. So take a deep breath. All right, and now we're going to do it. So we have two links that are available for you here. The first link is what we're going to use right now, oitdesign.nccu.edu/Gutenberg/quick. That will take you straight to Gutenberg. There will be no login required, no special anything. You just go straight in and start working with the new editor. Since it is quick and since there's no login required, nothing you do will be saved. So if you totally screw up the sample page that you see, that's absolutely okay. It's not a big deal because nothing's going to be saved. If you'd like to come back and work with the editor a little more and actually have your changes saved, then if you go to oitdesign.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg with no quick at the end, then you have the option of signing up for a test site that's available using your Unity login and password. Sign up for a test site. It's not going to be visible to the public. It's something that's only going to be visible to you when you log in, but it's an opportunity to get used to Gutenberg and try it out before it goes live on your website. And if you do decide you want it live on your website early, now's a good time to talk to whoever your web support team is or your website administrator and say, hey, I really want Gutenberg and I want it now. So I'm going to open up the Gutenberg Quick public sandbox. That's not what I wanted. Okay. So here we have the new Gutenberg editor. If you're looking at this now, you'll see as you scroll down, we've pre-populated it with a little bit of content. So you may be familiar with the other Gutenberg on the internet, Project Gutenberg, which is a free online repository of classic literature and other things that are in the public domain. So with that in mind, the most popular book on the other Project Gutenberg is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. So we've taken the first couple of chapters from Pride and Prejudice and pasted it into the Gutenberg editor. So you have a lot of content to work with, a lot of text, a lot of images. Feel free to play with it for a couple of minutes while I get myself a little bit of water, and then I'm going to walk you through a few things. All right, so I'm back with a glass of water and I feel much better. Sorry you've had to listen to me talk on and on and on for an hour. um, Hopefully you've had a chance to play with the new editor a little bit. I want to show off a couple of things real quick. Um, so I'm going to scroll down to some of the content down here. So you've hopefully seen that every little piece of content in the editor is a block. As you hover over it, you have this little label up at the top that tells you what kind of a block it is. So Pride and Prejudice right here, this text is a heading. This is really useful if you're not sure what something is, but you want to recreate it. All you have to do is hover over it to see, oh, well, this is an image and this is also an image. And so that will tell you that there are options available for configuring the image to look different ways, be different sizes, things like that. And you shouldn't go looking for a different block type, for instance. Um, so here we have a heading, here we have a subhead, here we have another heading, which is a different heading level. And we can see if I click on this heading, this is an H2 heading. So the title of the page is going to be an H1, and then this heading here is an H2 um, because it's a section of this page. And now if I drop down to the chapter title right here, this is an H3 because it's a subsection of this section. It's always a good idea for lots of different reasons to use appropriate headings. It's good for accessibility, it's good for search engine optimization, and it's good just for general readability. So here we have a paragraph of text. I can click into it and change my text all I want. Um, uh, Hello, people watching this video. This is not an original line of text from the Jane Austen book. Um, as I mentioned before, if you highlight, you can you can make text bold or italicized, or you can make it a link. Instance like that. If you go over to the right-hand side to your advanced block options, which again, I'll just remind you, you can show or hide using the drop down right here. Sometimes it tries to hide things on me. So if you look at your advanced block options, you can change your text size. So I'm going to make my paragraph big, and that's a little too big. So I'm going to drop this down to 24 point instead of 36. Or I can reset it back to the original. You have the drop cap option on paragraph blocks, which will give you this first letter as a large letter. You can change the background color. So here I'm going to change the background color here. I didn't mention this earlier, but we actually, one of the tools that we're working on um, will change all of these colors that are available right here to be NC State brand colors. So the NC State brand does not really have an option for pink, but in order to help people make good choices, um, we're going to remove these default colors and give you just the NC State brand colors. You'll still have the option of adding a custom color using this custom color selector. So if you really desperately need pink for some reason, you can do it. But generally speaking, we'll be having you use only the colors that make sense for the NC State brand. So I think what I said earlier was we're going to try to help you make good choices, but it's still on you to actually make those choices. You may have noticed when I had it in pink, or if I go to this red color here, um, Gutenberg will recognize that this is not a good color combination. This black color against a sort of a dark red background is going to be very hard to read and does not meet our accessibility guidelines. And so with that in mind, it gives you this little notice right here This color combination may be hard for people to read. Try using a brighter background color and or a darker text color. So what I will do is actually do the opposite. I'll keep my dark background color. I will use a brighter text color. This gray color is still not quite good enough. And so if I go all the way to white, there we go. Now there's enough contrast between the text and the background. You'll notice that this link that I added is still a red link, and that red link against a red background is no good. So I'm pointing that out, I guess, only to say that there's only so much that the Gutenberg editor can tell you. It's still on you to make good choices. Just because it's not giving you that warning doesn't mean that it's okay. It's still on you to take a look and decide, does a red link on a red background still really work? So I'm going to go ahead and clear both of my color selections. And then down here, we have this additional CSS class. If you're using a theme that has some CSS classes built in that you know about, you can add that class right there. I'm not going to show any examples of this because a lot of different units on campus use a lot of different themes, but it's something to talk about with your web support team or your web developer or administrator. So these are the block options available for the paragraph block. You'll notice up here you can toggle back and forth between the block options, the advanced options for this particular block, and the document-wide settings. So things that you might already be familiar with in WordPress, like featured image or the excerpt or turning on and off comments. And now we also have this new option, the table of contents, which will take your heading structure that we were talking about a moment ago, your H1, H2, H3, and show you the structure of your of the page that you're building. And actually, these are links. So if I click on chapter 2, it will jump me down to chapter 2. And if I click on chapter 1, it will take me right back to where I was. And if you're dealing with lots of content, that's incredibly helpful. Long pages are cumbersome, and this table of contents option is really handy. You'll also notice that if a block is not selected, so I'm going to go ahead and click into the white space right here. If a block is not selected and you switch over to the block settings, it will tell you there's nothing to show. And so this gets back to what I was saying earlier, that the options that are available to you really depend on what you're doing, what block you're interacting with. As soon as I click on a heading, now I get heading options over here. And if I switch to a paragraph, those options change. If I switch to an image, those options change again. I feel like maybe I've said this 7 different ways, but it is an important point because this is something that came up in our user testing again and again and again, is people forget about this right-hand sidebar, and people forget that the options are different depending on what block they're using. And like I said, half an hour in, a little bit of time working with this, you're going to be in great shape, but it might be a little bit of a bumpy half hour. We have a number of different types of block that are available to us. And so that's available up here in this add block menu right here. I want to show you how this works. So if I do not have any block selected and I add a new block, it will add the new block at the very end. If I do have a block selected, so for instance, I'm editing this paragraph right here, I'm sick of Mr. Bingley, and I go and add a new block, it will insert the new block immediately after the block that is selected. As you're writing, as you're typing, let's say I've finished typing this paragraph and I want to create a new paragraph, I can just hit the Enter key and I can continue typing as normal. And so in terms of your day-to-day content writing and editing, you don't really need to worry about blocks very much. You can just type some text and type some more text and not really have to worry about all this block stuff until you start adding images or other sort of rich media, rich text, things like that. When you hit your enter key and you don't want a paragraph block, as you hover over this empty block right here, you have a couple of things that appear. First, you have your add gallery and add heading and add image right here. These three buttons are not always going to be these three buttons. They're going to be buttons that Gutenberg tries to anticipate you might want based on some of the blocks that you've been using recently. So when we built this page, we used images and headings and galleries in addition to paragraphs. And so these are the anticipated blocks that it thinks we might want. If I don't want any of those blocks, here's the plus button again. So this plus button does the exact same thing that the plus button in the top left-hand corner does, except it will insert the block that we want right here where our blank block is. So I'll go ahead and add let's say a cover image. And so now my empty paragraph block has been removed, and now I have a cover image block. Now is a good time to show off the cover image. I mentioned it earlier on. I can click here to add an image. I can either upload or go to the media library. And I'll go ahead and select, let's say, this Reynolds Coliseum picture. Select that. And now I have the image, but since it's the cover image, what's sort of special about this block is I can add text over the image. And for legibility purposes, over here in the block options, now I have the option of dimming or undimming the background. So if I go all the way to 0, it's just the raw image, but that's really hard to read the text. So I'll scale this down probably to about a 60 or a 70, where I can read the text very clearly against the background and still be able to see the image. So hopefully you've had a chance to play with the editor a little bit. I'm going to show a couple of other things. Let's see. So first, the page title. If you click on the page title, you'll see the permalink up here. And so this is giving you the URL that your page or post will be available at. As of right now, this is not editable the way it is in sort of classic WordPress. That's a change that's going to be coming very soon. It's not a very hard change. And so the developers working on the project just haven't gotten around to it. The page title looks like a block. It has this little line around the outside, the same thing that you'll see when you're working with a with a paragraph block, for instance. But this is the only block that you can't move around, and also the only block that doesn't have its own special block options. So I'll go back to the paragraph block here. I mentioned moving it around, but I realized I had never actually shown how to move block around. So over here on the left-hand side, you have these little arrows. If you click the move down arrow, it'll hop down and change places with whoever was right below it. And similarly, if you click the move up arrow. But that's not all. If you hover over one of these and you click and hold, let me try that again. Oh, there we go. Now you can drag and drop the block and put it somewhere else. And so the little blue line will appear to give you an indicator of where it's about to drop it. So I'm going to drop my paragraph right here, and now it's there. The drag and drop functionality was added relatively recently, so it may be a little quirky still, but it gives you a lot of options for easily customizing and changing your content. I'll go ahead and drag it down again to right there. If you have multiple columns, which is something I mentioned earlier, so I'll go ahead and open a new block and click my plus button. I can find my column block by looking here under my layout options for columns experimental, but I can also find my column block by using the search tool at the top, starting to type column. So I'll go ahead and select columns experimental. And now what you'll see is a empty column right here with a plus button, and another empty column right here when you hover over it with another plus button. I am in an empty paragraph, which is inside of a column block. So here's some text. And now if I hover over here and click, here's some other text. If I hover just above it back into the column block, I have my column block options here, and so I'll go ahead and give myself a third column, like so. And I can go in here and click, and here's yet another column of text. It's not just text. I can take anything and put it into these columns. So to highlight that, I'll go ahead and grab this image. So this image is set to be a wide width. I'm going to make it a little smaller, make it just a regular width. I'll grab onto it with the drag and drop, and I will drop it into my left column. And you'll see a little blue line here indicating that it's going in the left column. The blue line doesn't extend all the way across. And I drop my image. And now I have my image in the same column as my first column of text. So you can keep doing things like that. And here I have selected the entire column. If I decide I want to drop back down to 2 columns or bump up to 4 or something like that. So compared to the existing classic WordPress editor, this is very powerful. We have a lot of tools that we have available to work with. It's just something that will take a little bit of time to practice. With that practice in mind, we have about 7 minutes left on the workshop schedule. You're welcome to continue to play with the editor and manipulate the content and rewrite Jane Austen all you want. But I'm going to give you a couple of challenges to work on. So your first challenge is to build something that looks like this. So we have some text and a right aligned image, and then a list underneath, and then another paragraph that has a background color and a large drop cap. So I've shown you how to do a lot of this. Hopefully the rest of it you can figure out how to do. I'm going to stand here quietly and give you a chance to try to do that. Unfortunately, the Star Wars Stormtrooper image is not available in the test environment that we have. We should really add those. But you can use one of the NC State generic images if you want. All right, so hopefully you've had a chance to do that. I'll go ahead and show you what it might look like. Um, so I have let's start with this paragraph of text right here. Um, I'll go ahead and add a new block, and I'll make that an image block and select an image from the media library. Let's go with this book right here. And by default, it gets added beneath the text paragraph and as a full width image. I want it to be a right aligned image, and let's make it even a little bit smaller. So I drag from the corner and make it a little smaller. And now I can use the little up and down arrow right here, or I can drag and drop it. It's a little counterintuitive that the arrows are still over here, even though the image has been moved over here. But I'll go ahead and move it up. Oops. And see, that's where it's counterintuitive, is I moved the wrong block. So let me select this. Okay, and interesting. All right, so something changed since the last time I did this. So that's a bug we're going to file. So I'm going to go ahead and align it center again so that I know I have my arrows here, and I'm going to move it up one level and then put it to the align right. All right, so now I have my image aligned to the right the way I'd like it to be next to the text. And then I'll go ahead and select the paragraph right after it, and I'll do some of what we saw over here with the gray background and the drop cap. Those are both advanced block settings. I'll go ahead and turn on the drop cap, and I will give it a gray background color, like so. So I'll give you another challenge right here, is to build a gallery. So I showed you the column shortcode earlier. I'm going to give you a hint and say don't use that. Instead, look for a different block that you might use to build a photo gallery. I'll also give you a hint and say that the name of the block to build a photo gallery is called gallery. You may have seen it already while you've been using the editor. My challenges are not super complicated. So hopefully you've had a chance now to find the gallery block. If you haven't, I can show you what it might look like. Scroll up here and do it here. So I'm going to hit enter to open up a blank block. And now hovering over it, I see this button right here. I'll go ahead and click it to add a block. And the gallery block is right here. I can search for it if I don't see it there. And then I can also see it under the blocks tab right here. So I'll go ahead and select gallery and add images from my media library. Then here I can select multiple images. So I'll go ahead and select this one, and let's say this one. I already used him earlier. And so I've selected my images and I click create new gallery. And if you've ever done this in WordPress before, this should look familiar. If you haven't, galleries are a lot of fun in Gutenberg. So here are my 3 images that I've selected, and I can drag and drop them around. If I decide I want to add something new to the gallery, I can either go back and cancel, or I can click add to gallery and select my images again. So let's this time do a few extras. So the images that I selected before are already in there. Now I'm selecting additional images to add. So I click add to gallery. And so now I'm up to 6 images total. And again, I can drag and drop them around. If they don't already have a caption, I can add a caption here. And I'll click insert gallery. And now Gutenberg will take my 6 images and size them and arrange them in a way that it thinks makes sense. But if I don't like that, I can adjust the number of columns. So now instead of a 3-column gallery, I have a 2-column gallery. Instead of 2 columns, I could bump it up to be 5 columns. So when I'm done, what I'll end up with is 5 very narrow little images in the first row, and then 1 big image in the second row. Um, and I can decide I don't really like that. So I'm going to bump it down, back down to 3 columns, but also I want to get rid of this image. I can select the image and click the X to remove it. This will still give me the option of uploading another image, but if I click out of the gallery, we'll see them rearrange into a really nice 3 in the first row, 2 in the second row. So Gutenberg will make some smart choices for you um, that at least for the photo gallery block, I think looks really nice. I have one last challenge, but we are at 3:32 by my clock, so we're just over time. I'm going to hang out here for a few more minutes. We don't have to end right away, but I'll leave you with this last challenge right here to create a page that uses the cover image. This right here is a recent posts list, so the list of the latest posts that have been published, and then right here a YouTube embed. So if you can go ahead and try to do something like that. It is after 3:30, so I won't be offended at all if you log off. But thank you very much for listening. I'm going to hang out here and answer questions and show off a few more things. But please let us know if you have any questions, and I'll be sharing a link to the slides out in just a little bit. So if you're still with me, hopefully you've had a chance to find these blocks, but I'll go ahead and show them off right now. So let's go up a little bit. Let's do it right here, let's say. So I will insert a block right in the middle, right here. And let's start with the cover image. I showed you a cover image earlier, but let's do it again. Let's say this time, let's use the bell tower. I can type whatever I'd like over the cover image. And then I also have options for making text bold or italicized or aligning it. And then I also want to point out up at the top here, I have some options for changing the width and the alignment. So just like with a regular image, I can make it align to the left or align to the right. But Gutenberg also has some extra classes available to it for alignment. So I can make it a little bit bigger, where I can break it out of the column, the text column, and make it a little bit wider. And then if I want to make it even wider still, I can set it to full width, and it will span all the way from one edge of the page to another. How that looks on your website is going to depend a little bit on how your theme is built. Um, so talk to your developer if you know who the developer is, or contact the help desk if you need help finding out, if you're curious, and if it doesn't do exactly what you expect it to do. So that's a cover image block. Uh, and the other things that I gave in that example, we have um, a list of recent posts. So this demo site doesn't really have any recent posts, but I can go ahead and there I go. There I am. I can go ahead and add that block anyway. So I'll go to blocks, and this one you'll find under widgets, latest posts, and it processed it and determined that the only post that had been published is this one that we're working with right now, Meet Gutenberg. So that's not super useful. Normally on your website, you would have many more, but you have the option over here in the block settings to choose how many posts you'd like to display. By default, it starts with 5, but you could bump that up to whatever you want. Again, there's only one post available, so if I make it 10, it's still only going to show one. You can change the order. You can filter by category. There's only one category on this website, so it doesn't really do anything here. And then you can choose to show or hide the post date. Um, we're also actually working on a custom NC State block that will give you more options for showing the excerpt and displaying it in a grid pattern and things like that. There's actually a grid option right here as well, which doesn't really do a whole lot since there aren't any other posts. I feel like we need to add some more posts to show this off a little bit better. But so that's that block. And then finally, uh, we have, oops, finally we have a block at the bottom with a YouTube video. So I'll go ahead and add that as well. So I will add an embed and YouTube, and let's find a YouTube video. I was in college. I didn't go to NC State, but I was in the marching band. So I've got a soft spot in my heart for marching bands. So I'll go ahead and take this YouTube video and copy the URL and paste it into the YouTube URL field and embed. And Gutenberg processes that as an embed like so. And so this is just like any other block. I can drag it and drop it, move it around. Oops. Seems to have gotten confused. Let me try that again. So like I said before, it's still under development, and every now and then you encounter something that's a little quirky. Here we go. Excuse me. And so now we have all 3 pieces that we had in the example over here. So thank you very much for watching and sitting in on this workshop. I'm going to hang out here for another 5 minutes until 3:45. If you have any questions you want to add to the Q&A document, but otherwise, I hope you'll go to the evaluation link here. Go to nccu.edu/wp-eval and let us know how we did, especially for YouTube Live workshops where I'm not really seeing any audience feedback, and I don't know if you're bored or you're angry or you're confused or maybe you're just hungry. Any of those things. I don't have any way of knowing that. So any feedback you give us is very much appreciated. And I'll be sharing this link and also the link to the slides out in an email in just a little bit. So thank you very much. Like I said, I'll be here to answer questions for a little bit longer if you want to type into the Q&A document. But otherwise, feel free to have a nice day. All right, well, I have 3:45. I don't know if anyone's still listening, but I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast. Thank you very much, everybody, once again for listening, and let us know if you have any questions.